Jerry, how are you?
Hey, doing well.
Good to see you again. It's been a little while, but I hear there's some good news coming out that you have a book, January 6th, about Ron Wyatt's discovery of the Ark of the Covenant, yeah?
Yeah, I guess it's somewhat coincidental that January 6th for years has been in the news,
Mm-hmm.
considering what happened in 2021. But we came out with a new book called January 6th because back in 1982 is when Ron Wyatt first went into the chamber that held the Ark of the Covenant. And in our research, and we'll get into it a little bit, I guess, as we go through our time together, um, of why that particular date became so important. But yeah, we came out with a new book. It's in digital form right now, up on the website. That can be can be downloaded from up there, and also it will be coming out as an audio book probably in a week or two, and then eventually it will be in hard copy. So we'll have that all three. We're trying to work toward this year. We're trying to work toward getting all of our publications set up in digital form and audio book, and also hard copies. So obviously it takes a good bit of effort and time to kind of get that all coordinated and worked out. But we're going to work at it and see how it works.
A lot of research went into it, I'm sure, as well.
Sure.
Okay.
So.
I wanted to ask you about a particular chapter here, which is chapter 2 of the book, and it's named The Real Song Playing at Calvary. Can you explain that a bit? Because I like your phrasing there.
Yeah, that's based on a reference in the Bible in the Psalms, Psalm 25:14. And it just says, "The secret of the Lord is with them that fear him, and he will show them his covenant." And the reason why, I mean, the Psalms are songs that David or others would have sung. That was indeed the song that was playing there because of what was being revealed. There's no question that for those that really knew Ron Wyatt, I traveled with him a couple of times, went to his house a few times. Did not know him as well as others because others spent obviously a lot more time with him. But the time that I did spend and the opportunity that I did have to interview and ask questions and so forth, I certainly had an opportunity to gauge the character of the man. And of course, in following his research since 1987, you're able to, kind of look into the depths of someone's soul as you watch them and as you listen to them and hear them as they explain, what God is doing and how God is doing it in their lives. And so Ron definitely had the word there, fear, typically means a very healthy respect. And so Ron had a very healthy respect for the holiness and righteousness of God. I mean, there's nobody that can really absorb the intensity of all of that. But Ron had a very healthy respect for the Lord, and he knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that God was leading him. And he had become very convicted and convinced in what he was doing. And he had several angelic encounters, which, there are a number of people around that have had some of those, but Ron had, I think, probably more than his share. And that was necessary at times for what God was wanting to do with him. But because Ron was there and he had that healthy respect, God knew it was time to reveal something that had been going on and witnessed that took place below Calvary over 2,000 years ago. And so here was somebody seeing something, being exposed to this beautiful song. And, a lot of times at weddings, there's music that's playing, about a union, etc. And here there was a union taking place. There was a marriage taking place below Calvary that most Christians are not even privy to understanding. And that most definitely was occurring there. And Ron Wyatt had the privilege and the honor to actually be a part of it. And what a glorious moment that had to be. And I know that when Ron often talked about that, he would tear up. It was it's such an emotional experience for him, having been there and to recognize that the blood from Christ on the side came down and actually anointed the relationship that was established there in providing the atonement. In fact, atonement means covering, reconciliation, satisfaction, etc. But the word is at one-ment. There was a real at one-ment that was occurring there, and it takes two to have an at one-ment. That's why marriage in the Bible is a representation symbolic of atonement. It's two becoming one. And that was what was needed to be accomplished at Calvary. It was a glorious song that was being sung that day.
And what prompted you? When did you decide in your mind, this is a book I need to write?
Well, I'll tell you what, Brandon, it goes back even when we were, it kind of stems from when we were doing the Ark Secret book.
Mm-hmm.
When we were doing the Ark Secret book, one of the things that we had recognized after about being involved in the research for 15 to 18 years. So, from 87, about maybe 2002, 2003, we began to ask ourselves the question, what is really going on here? It was so easy to get kind of really fixated and overwhelmed by the information from any one of the sites. Noah's Ark and Sodom and Gomorrah, the Red Sea crossing, the real Mount Sinai. Once you started kind of really, and it was like a lot of the information was so overwhelming because here you were looking at and considering biblical evidence. And a lot of times when people read the Bible, they read it on a surface level.
Yeah.
But what the discoveries accomplished was revealing things that were kind of hidden below the surface, a lot of the gems below the surface. And so as you were digging into it more and more and more and more, you began to see more of these gems. Well, we decided, there's something going on here. There's more than just because we realized early on that it seemed quite evident that God was leading Ron Wyatt to a lot of these particular areas. And we knew that these areas had been searched for and hunted for and sought after by archaeologists and treasure hunters and explorers, for 1,000 years or longer. And so all of a sudden, the reality sets in that, here God is taking someone here and there and other place, and Ron is being led to these locations. There has to be a particular reason for this. And so as we had to step back and to look at things in a collective manner instead of just focusing on each individual thing. And once we did that, we began to recognize that there was something specific going on. There was something miraculous that was taking place. This wasn't just arbitrary or accidental or, just good luck or whatever it might be. There was something very unique happening with all of this. And we started to look at the particular stories involved. And when we summarized each of those stories, like Noah's Ark is really a story about mercy, when you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Sodom and Gomorrah is a story about judgment.
Mm-hmm.
The investigations of the pyramids and the grain bins at Saqqara is really a story about perseverance. The Red Sea crossing, where they crossed the Gulf of Aqaba there and whatnot, I mean, that's quite obvious. That was a story about deliverance.
Yep.
And then they went to Mount Sinai as a result of crossing the Red Sea shortly after that. And, that was a story about relationship. God took them there to establish a special relationship with them. They were a called out people, but he took them there for a very specific reason, I believe, dealing with relationship. And then, of course, you have other areas. Ron was actually eventually in 1979, he would be working at the Garden Tomb area. And so you have, the Garden Tomb site, and you have also Gethsemane close by, and that's a story about victory, the spiritual victory over sin and death that occurred, of course, in Gethsemane, and then the physical victory over sin and death that occurred at the Garden Tomb. And then you had, of course, the Ark of the Covenant. And the Ark of the Covenant site became all about sacrifice. And so, in fact, a greater sacrifice than most Christians are even familiar with. And so as we stepped back and we started to recognize this, we said, well, hey, wait a minute. This is actually the gospel message. This is the everlasting gospel message that the book of Revelation talks about.
Also,
In Matthew 24, Jesus said simply, when this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world as a witness, then the end shall come. And in Titus 2:11, it says, for the grace that bringeth salvation hath appeared to all mankind, or to all men, but the word is, as in the Greek, is mankind. And that word, when it says the grace of God, when the grace of God is revealed, it really means it's a visual exhibit, is the what the Greek indicates there. When it appears to all mankind, it's a visual exhibit appearing to humanity. Mm. And so as we began to kind of dig into what the real gospel message is, we began to realize that the gospel message is a message of mercy, but also judgment. It's a message of perseverance, but also deliverance. It's a message of relationship, sacrifice, and ultimately victory. And so all of a sudden we began to realize that what was happening is that God was producing a visual exhibit of his grace that was going to all humanity, right? And just before, this would happen, of course, just before Christ would come a second time to kind of rescue and take his children, the redeemed, back to heaven with him for the millennial period. But at any rate, that became the basis for the Ark Secret book. That something miraculous was taking place, right? And it was, God was using these particular sites. There are many stories in the Bible, but God was selecting ones that correlated with the message of the gospel, the everlasting gospel message, the good news, right? And of course, that's the first 3 chapters in the Ark Secret book kind of deal with that, that discovery and exactly how that coordinates. And there's a lot of Bible texts in there that talk about the everlasting gospel message. And people that have gone through that have really found that to be fascinating. But this is what God was doing. He was he was stepping into the equation, so to speak. Yeah, for I guess, since the Christian era of time began, since the message began to go to the Gentiles back in 34 AD, when there was that transition between the Jewish nation and then the Christian dispensation, you've had seemingly it seemed as though God was kind of sitting on the sidelines, watching his team, coaching his team, so to speak, go down the field. But now, with these discovery sites that he was leading Ron to, he kind of came into the game. Now he was in the game personally, leading his team down the field. And that's kind of how it felt when we began to realize that God was taking Ron to all of these particular sites that illustrated the everlasting gospel message of mercy and judgment and perseverance and deliverance and sacrifice, and perseverance, a relationship and sacrifice and victory. So that became kind of the basis. Now, when we also started asking the same question about why January 6th. I mean, I guess for a lot of years, we just assumed it was the time that Ron worked through all of the process in the excavation. And of course, he would be over there, not full time, not working full time, but he would be over there working when he was had the available time to work. You know, he had a full time job at the hospital as an anesthetist. And so, you know, when he would get breaks and vacation time and whatnot, he would, you know, get his boys or get some other volunteers, and they would go over and they would work there. Well, this process actually began in 1978. And of course, what the book is about why and how January 6th became such a targeted date, and actually, I guess in the Hebrew it would be called a moed. It would be like a divine appointment. And so God had established this date from what we can perceive, even long before Ron started his research out in Turkey in 1977.
Well, does January 6th have any kind of significance throughout history in the Bible?
Well, it really does. And that's where we kind of begin the book. We draw attention to the fact that when you look at the Hebrew calendar, obviously, a lot of people would not be familiar with, you know, what certain days correspond to. Mm-hmm. Well, once we began to ask ourselves the question about January 6th, we started to search for, you know, why would that date have been significant throughout history and even from a biblical standpoint. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that January 6th, 1982, and that's significant, also that particular year, that date would correspond to the 10th Hebrew month of Tevet on the Hebrew calendar.
What does that mean?
Okay, so well, on the Hebrew calendar, you have, of course, obviously different names, mm-hmm. and they had a civil calendar, but also a sacred calendar. And so the 10th month on the Hebrew calendar is the month of Tevet, which typically corresponds to some period of time in December or January. It's a winter time, if you will, wintertime date, even on the Hebrew calendar. Well, what's interesting about the month of Tevet is that there is a day, the 10th of that month, is a day of mourning. Asara B'Tevet 10 is a day of mourning for the Jewish people, a day of mourning and repentance, etc., because of events that took place at that time. Now, it's similar. It's not quite as notable as the 9th of Av, and some people that in your audience would recognize that the 9th of Av was when the first temple in 586 BC was destroyed. Okay? Now, what's interesting about that whole process as well is that it was also on the 9th of Av that the second temple was destroyed 70 AD.
Oh, that okay.
So, okay. Yeah, so 650, I think it's 655 years or something like that. 655 years between the two events, and they're destroyed on the same day, the 9th of Av. And so that is a particular day of mourning and repentance and all this kind of thing for the Jewish people. But also Tevet 10 was when the Babylonians the Babylonians, for literally a dozen or more years, had been coming up to Jerusalem and conquering it. And when you go into the Bible and you find out that some of the leadership in Jerusalem, uh, they were rebelling. They were kind of they were always supposed to pay tribute to Babylon. Babylon was like the superpower of the day. And when they would stop paying tribute and would rebel, so to speak, Nebuchadnezzar would take and send his army over and, kind of set them straight. Well, in 605, and of course the book goes through all this history. Okay, the January 6th book goes through all the history here. 605 BC is when they go over there, I think the first time, and they depose the leadership there, and they set up a new person, and then of course they go back, they go away, and then when it happens again in 597 BC, they go back and depose that leader and set up somebody else. And again, the book gives all the names, Jehoiachim and Jehoiakim, which was like father and son, and then eventually his uncle, Jehoiachim's uncle, is set up finally. But anyway, he rebels again at the encouragement of the Egyptians, and eventually Nebuchadnezzar sends back his imperial guard, the leader of the imperial guard, Nebuzaradan, and they go back in 588 BC, and they besiege the city of Jerusalem. That occurs on Tevet 10. Okay? Now, January 6, 1982, is Tevet 11. So something significant, and what I'm proposing in the book, January 6, is that something significant happened on Tevet 11, as well as Tevet 10, which would have been a day after. Now, when you go into, again, we go through all this information there. When you go through and look at the scenario that played out, it took Solomon 7 years to finish up on his construction of the first temple. Mm-hmm. And after that time, or during that time, they were remaking a lot of the tabernacle furniture. And I think it's First Chronicles chapter 4 goes through all of the specifics. He made, of course, new altar sacrifice, a new laver. I think even two. He made not just one candlestick, not just one menorah, but he put a set of 10 in the new temple. Also, 10 tables of showbread, etc. It goes through all of the specifics there. So that meant that the wilderness tabernacle, the portable tabernacle that they carried around with them through the wilderness, all of that was now unnecessary. And of course, we believe that would have been stored away for safekeeping. The only original piece of sacred furniture would have been the Ark of the Covenant that would have been in the most holy place in Solomon's temple. Okay. And I'm talking about, the portable tabernacle had, all of the boards. The boards were the vertical boards that they erected, to actually make the tabernacle proper, that were covered in gold, etc. They were 17 feet in length, and they would use, like 20 of them down one side and, 10 across the back side, etc., that kind of thing. And they'd have the silver sockets that they would sit in, and, all the furnishings, the the draperies and all the things, the seal skins, etc.
All the stuff that they found, that Ron found in there with it, is believed to be exactly that, right? Like yes. All the boards and all the skins and all that, right?
Absolutely. The original portable wilderness tabernacle was stored away, right? Now, Jeremiah was the prophet at the time, and he would have known that location. But I think that also God probably instructed him, look, you've seen the Babylonians come back and forth here 2, 3, 4 times. one of these times you're going to get greedy, and they're going to go ahead and they're going to destroy the city and perhaps even the temple.
Right.
They're going to ransack it or whatever. So I think that God had instructed Jeremiah that when, particularly on this last in 588 BC, when you see them come up and besiege the city, when you see them come up and surround the city, I want you to get the Ark of the Covenant out of harm's way. And I want you to secret it away with the rest of the wilderness tabernacle furniture. And so we believe on the 10th, when that occurred, that was the signal, that was the sign that Jeremiah recognized. He had his priests the next day go in and take the ark, which was only accessed once a year anyway, so nobody would even miss it for the for the time that the Babylonians would have been there. They went ahead and took it, I believe, and actually hid it in a stone case in that very chamber as well. Anyway, so now all of the wilderness tabernacle furniture is hidden in that chamber. So we have come to understand that from 1977, when Ron began his actual field research work, even before that, he had been doing in-depth studies on the possible location of Noah's Ark. And he had come across the 1960 Life magazine article of the Vandeman expedition, which was there in 1960. And so he was impressed. So for that 17 years, he had a lot of time to do study and research as to the possibility. And so we believe God was impressing him the whole time to begin that journey, which would ultimately culminate in him being at the entrance of where the ark had been hidden in that chamber on also the 10th month and the 10th day. So just like, this is part of the story that a lot of people are unfamiliar with because it's not really listed on the newsletters. It's not really listed in the newsletters. But what actually occurred, and Ron recorded it that way in his newsletters to keep certain individuals out of the limelight in terms of how things played out. But a lot of people, when you read the newsletter, they have the impression that when Ron was near the entrance and he would make a hole, the way he would work with this young Arab man is he would make a small hole in this younger, slender Arab man had the ability to slide through these small openings and look around to see if there was anything of interest in there, and then they would go on to the next place if there wasn't. Well, as you read one of the newsletters, either newsletter 4 or 12 on the Anchorstone site, because we have them listed there, you'll find that this particular time, as the newsletter indicates, Ron made the opening into the wall and the young man slid in there. But this time, instead of being in there looking around and letting Ron know, well, there's nothing of interest in here, he bolted out of there, frantic, scared to death.
That happened almost immediately, right? Like as soon as he went in there, he immediately came out, right?
Yes, almost immediately. And he's like, what's in there? What's in there? I'm not going back in there. And he was startled beyond on words. And Ron was trying to ask him, well, what's in there? What's in there? What did you see? And he never would indicate what he had seen in there. He just started making his way out of the excavation. Well, what's not recorded in the newsletters is that there was another individual that was working up higher in the excavation, just clearing out debris.
At the same day or the same time?
This is at the same time.
Okay.
And this individual, he also passed away in 5 years before Ron in 1995. But this individual had come over kind of unexpectedly, because Ron had to send home his sons. If you read the newsletter, you find out that both of them got sick. In fact,
Yeah.
all three of them were sick.
Hmm.
And on Christmas Eve, I think it was Danny that had to be sent home. And then on New Year's Eve, Ronnie had one or the other. Both of them ended going home a week apart from being sick. And so that left Ron by himself. And when the first son got home, this other individual that was a friend of Ron's and understood what he was doing and why he was doing it, he quick hopped on a plane and went over there believing that Ron was over there working by himself. And he didn't think that was a good idea. And he had the ability and the resources to just jump on a plane and hop over there. So he apparently came over there and ended up working there with Ron that particular day. This would have been the 5th of January when they were working together at the site, which was the 10th of Tevet, which was the same day that Nebuzaradan had besieged the city of Jerusalem. Well, when this young Arab man, bolted out of the excavation and actually came up and went past this other individual, he said he could tell he was upset and frantic. The way he was moving, and he was scared. And this other individual thought, well, something must have happened, and he was trying to ask him, was there a cave-in? Is Ron okay? What's going on? And he couldn't get a straight answer from the guy. The guy just kept on going, right? And so he started to make his way down into the lower into the excavation. It takes probably about 10 or 12, 15 minutes to kind of get down to where Ron was. And so he finally got down there, and he saw Ron standing there at the entrance, just shining the flashlight through the opening. And again, it was a small opening. There was no way that Ron could even squeeze into it. He was a much larger person. And this other individual was actually shorter, but also fairly good size. And so when he got there, he's just asking Ron, what's going on? And Ron's telling him, well, and he told him, he said, they called him James. That wasn't his name, but they gave him the name of James. James just tore off out of here. What's happening? And Ron said, I don't know. He just bolted out of here, scared to death. So they knew at that point that something was up with this particular location. Okay. Now, as it turns out, this individual was scheduled to leave and go back home on the next day. I think he only came over maybe for a couple of days or whatever. And he was going to be going home the next day. So Ron, it's interesting to me that at that moment, and I don't know exactly the reason why they didn't just enlarge the hole at that moment, because his friend asked him, he said, well, look, do you want me to try to squeeze in there? And Ron said, no, you've got to get home tomorrow or leave tomorrow. And if you get in there and you can't get out, I can't get in there and get you right away. And so there was this concern. And I believe that the reason they didn't decide to enlarge the hole right then and there and go in was because it was not the 11th of Tevet.
Well, did Ron ever say why he didn't do it that day?
I don't think anybody ever asked him, because the way it's recorded in the newsletter is that situation on the 5th didn't really occur from the newsletter standpoint. And it was only the next day, after he saw his friend off to head home, that he decided to go down there and enlarge the hole himself. And I firmly believe, absolutely believe, that Ron was scheduled to go into that chamber on the 6th of January, because that was the 11th of Tevet, the same day that Jeremiah hid the ark in that chamber. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm hoping the folks can realize the purpose in all of that. This is the way God works to emphasize the importance and the legitimacy
Right.
of
Yeah.
what's going on at that location. Okay. Just like the 9th of Av, when you had the destruction of the first temple and the second temple, it was as if God was okaying that. It's as if God was allowing that to occur. His fingerprint, if you will, his understanding of the importance of that particular day is in his eyes, in his mind. And I think the same thing was playing out here with the rediscovery now. The ark is hidden on that day, and then it's rediscovered on that day. Okay. And so now what the book does, after the book introduces this idea, this concept, this potential, right? Which seems incredibly likely to me, and I firmly believe that it happened just that way. Okay. And one of the reasons I believe that is because of the rest of the book. What the rest of the book goes through is the breadcrumbs that God was dropping along the way to Ron, for Ron, hinting at and suggesting that he would eventually deal with looking for the Ark of the Covenant. You see, you got to remember, Ron's own testimony was that when he started his journey here, his investigations and journey into all of this, he never even considered looking for the Ark of the Covenant. That was never on his radar. But yet, when you look at, for example, 1977, when he started looking at Noah's Ark, I'll just give you one example with that. I think we provide a couple of examples in the book. One of the examples that ties Noah's Ark to the Ark of the Covenant, right, deals with part of the construction process, right? When you look in the book of Genesis, chapter 6, it lays out the construction, some construction particulars in dealing with Noah's Ark. One of the things that they were to do with it was to seal it with pitch, right?
Yep.
In that sealing process, you can read about in Genesis 6:14. Excuse me. Genesis 6:14. He was to apply the pitch, as it says, outwardly and also inwardly, right? Now, in Ron's examination over 10 years, and our follow-up over an additional 10 years, both of us and both teams of people have come to the conclusion that the ark was constructed with a double wall application. In other words, if you think of a house framing, how you frame up a wall of a house and you cover it with sheathing on one side and you cover it with finishing material on the inside, right? That gives you kind of a finished wall for a home. Well, Noah's Ark apparently had two of those with a dead airspace between them.
Oh, really?
Now, the dead airspace, and of course, this is what the radar scans and so forth have indicated. So the dead airspace could be used for a couple of different things. We can only speculate. In fact, maybe everything that we can think of, it was probably used for.
Good
But there seemed to be a dead airspace between the two. Okay, but the point is they were pitched inside and out. So you had pitch on the inside and the outside of perhaps each wall. Okay, and we go through some other particulars as to the reason why the pitch was necessary. But here's the interesting thing, and here's how it's tied to the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant dealt with the atonement process, right?
Yep.
The at-one-ment process below Calvary is dealing with the atonement satisfaction.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
And reconciliation. Well, the word atonement in the Hebrew is the word kafar. The first time it's used, in the Bible is Genesis 6:14 with the word pitch. The word pitch in that construction process is the word kafar, right? And of course, it makes sense because atonement means to cover, to reconcile.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they were doing is they were using the pitch to cover and seal the wood. Okay, so it makes sense, right?
Yep. Symbology is there.
Okay, but the word is used. Here's the interesting thing: the word is used twice in the same text. Okay, in the King James. Now, if you get outside of the King James, a lot of people take the liberty to eliminate.
Yep. Yep.
They'll just
They
say
change it.
They'll just say it was covered with pitch inside and out. But in Genesis 6:14 in the King James, it says it covered with pitch outwardly, and it was pitched inwardly. Okay, so the word pitch is used twice. Now you would think that just logically that the same Hebrew word would be translated, but that's not the case in this verse. In this verse, something unique is taking place. Okay, and that's actually chapter 9 of this book. And the Ark Secret book actually talks about, in fact, I think it's entitled Kafar and Kofar, chapter 9 of this book. Right? Yeah, you go to chapter 9, it's got a picture of Noah's Ark there. And it just says, chapter 9, Kofar and Kofar. Okay? All right, so you've got two words in Genesis 6:14. One is translated atonement, kafar. The other word is similar, but it's kofar, right? And that means ransom, the cost or price of a life. So, and of course, if you get this book and you read that chapter, you'll understand exactly why you have two different Hebrew words when it's translated as the same in the King James. But the point of it is, it's dealing with atonement. It's dealing with atonement. And of course, it strikes a direct link to the Ark of the Covenant. Okay, and particularly the mercy seat. The mercy seat in Hebrew is called the Kaporeth. And Kaporeth is defined as the place of atonement, or the place of at-one-ment. Okay, so the mercy seat was defined as the place where atonement would actually occur in the Hebrew. And so that's just one example that we put in that particular chapter in the book January 6th. We put a couple of examples of how Noah's Ark is directly tied to the Ark of the Covenant. All right, so we started to look further. How about, the same time that Ron was working in 1977, he was working on Noah's Ark. If he would get a delay or there would be a roadblock that would occur, since he's in that part of the world, he would go over to Israel. If he had hit a roadblock, he would go back to Israel. And he would be driving down Route 90, which is the road next to the Dead Sea, heading toward the Gulf of Aqaba, heading toward Egypt. Okay. And so in 1978, just a year later, he's down at the Red Sea working there, looking for chariot parts and so forth, trying to find things down at the Red Sea. The Red Sea experience that he has down there, God starts to drop breadcrumbs connected to the Ark of the Covenant. Okay. In fact, not just breadcrumbs, but actual miraculous experiences. You come back to Sodom and Gomorrah. After driving by down Route 90, time and time again, he looked over and he saw these ashen remains. He didn't know they were ashen remains. He just saw what looked like design and structure of buildings along that road, back off the road, basically in the foreground were the mountains in the background. And so he noticed this color difference from the background, natural mountains. He noticed there looked like he had a construction background. And so he noticed what looked like design and structures. And so eventually he pulled off the road sometime in 1978, and he started looking at some of these remains, what eventually became the remains of Gomorrah. And he took some samples on his first trip by there. He didn't have time at that time to really do any examination, but he took samples of things that they found. And the interesting thing was, when he was there on that particular visit, all of a sudden a little rainstorm blew up. And they had a little rainstorm which knocked some of the material down onto the ground from a higher level. And he noticed in these different sections that had fallen down these little balls of something that were embedded in this ash.
Now,
and so he ended up.
Isn't it true in that area they get very little rain?
A quarter to a half inch,
right?
And annually.
And it just so happened while he was there,
this
they got a rainstorm.
Day, a rainstorm crops up, knocks this stuff down, and he starts seeing what looks like just these little balls of something embedded in this slab of material that's fallen from a higher level. So he takes some samples. He gets some samples of this and whatnot. And he eventually, when he gets back to his house, gets back home in the States, he takes them to a lab that he's using for material testing, and he just drops them off there and gives them instructions, and they're going to go ahead and do some tests. Well, he goes on his way. A couple of weeks later, he goes back and he finds out that, well, these balls are not native sulfur, but pressed powdered sulfur. In fact,
what does that mean?
Native sulfur is like 40% concentrated native sulfur, and it's in crystalline form usually. But this pressed powdered material that he's given has about a 95% concentration of sulfur. And so he comes to understand, well, these are, and they're in this material, and this material is not soil. It's not layers of soil that have fallen down. It was a layer, it was a slab of ashen remains that had fallen down. So now and of course, he's very familiar with the story in the Bible in Genesis 19, talking about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And so he begins to put two and two together. He realizes these must be the ashen remains of Sodom and Gomorrah. Mm. Now, how does that story link up with the Ark of the Covenant? The book goes through that, you see. The book goes through that, how there is a link. There's a breadcrumb that God is dropping there to try to get him to be thinking about the possibility of looking for the Ark.